So the day has finally come and we have our new English restriction list, first time in a while since the Refrost limit. So let's go over what it brings, what kind of new things it brings and how it differs from the Japanese one as well. So you can access this on, well, the Vanguard official website. I'll put a link in the description, but let's go over the restrictions and Bushiroad's explanation behind them. So first one is obviously TikTok worker. This should have happened a while ago. So the restriction is starting from January 30th, so all of these restrictions are actually going to be implemented a couple days before the Japanese ones, which is a first in a while. So starting from January 30th, 2017, fighters may only include up to one copy of TikTok worker in a deck and cannot use it as a first Vanguard in all Bushiroad official and Bushiroad sanctioned English version tournaments. This applies to all cards with the same name should there is any reprints in the future. Wow, they actually made a grammar mistake there. So their reason for this is we have identified that TikTok worker allows Gear Chronicle decks to win very consistently and is widely used among players in major tournaments. We recognize the influences that it may cause to the tournament environment in the future, therefore the above mentioned restriction will be implemented. So Japanese Vanguard got this restriction a long time ago, honestly, like quite a while ago, and I was just waiting until it would happen here, but it didn't until now. But yeah, TikTok worker is a really important card for Gears, and the fact that we could run it at 4 until now is pretty silly. But it's good that it also hit it as a starter, so that's very important. But I feel like, you know, like their explanation is good, but they could also talk about the fact that, like, what it interacts with, why it's banned, because right now people are just like, okay, it's banned, but why? Like, their explanation isn't that good, so I'm gonna kind of criticize that as we go through all these explanations. So, next is Steam Battler Urwatar. Again, starting from January 30th, fighters may only include up to one copy of Steam Battler Urwatar in a deck in all Bushiroad official and Bushiroad sanctioned English version tournaments. This applies to all cards if there is any reprints in the future. So the reason for this one is we have identified that Steam Battler Urwatar allows Gear Chronicle decks to win very consistently and is widely used among players in major tournaments, same as TikTok. We recognized that restricting TikTok worker alone would not be sufficient, therefore the above mentioned restriction will be implemented. So their explanation is basically, well, hitting TikTok isn't enough, even though Japan got it ages ago, so let's include Urwatar too. They don't really acknowledge the fact that even if it's at 1, Melem can search it out all the time. So this restriction, again, is pretty silly in my opinion, and a lot of players will agree that just hitting Urwatar, it damages decks like Chronofang more than it damages Chronojet, because like for Chronojet, they're still gonna search it out all the time. Like, it's so easy for them. But, you know, it's pretty sad. Like, it's, I don't know, at least it makes it so that, like, if they damage check it, then it's pretty much, you know, it's gonna be there until they heal it. But other than that, like, they can Soul Blast it, they can put it back to deck from Drop Zone, like, you know, they can call it from hand and Timely Pit into something with Jet G. Like, hitting it to 1 is not gonna do too much. It just makes it so that if it hits damage zone, then they're not gonna be making as many, not gonna be plussing as much every turn. But yeah, so I think we all wish that Melem would have got hit together, but because Melem got reprinted in Revival Collection, I really didn't see that happening at all, just because it would kind of hinder sales. But, you know, there's other cards that could have been hit, but I feel like Melem was the first one. But, like, apart from hitting her, they could have just reprinted her in Revival Collection with an errata, and that would have been fine as well, but oh well. Let's move on to probably the most important one, which is 70's Apprentice Night Runner. So, restriction is, starting from January 30th, fighters may include up to one copy of Night Runner in a deck and cannot use it as a first Vanguard in all Bushiroad official, This applies to all cards, And then, so it's exactly the same as the Japanese one, and now that he's at 1 and cannot be used as a starter, that means that you won't be able to make misplays where you mill one off another one. So, you know, that's pretty nice, and like, this is probably the one that I'm happiest with, but let's read the reason first. We have identified that 70's Apprentice Night Runner increased the stability of decks that stops at grade 1, and the influence caused to the tournament environment is not favorable for the game. Therefore, the above mentioned restriction will be implemented. So, they basically say, like, you know, this helps grade 1 decks, and that is not good for the tournament environment, which is true, because, you know, Bushiroad doesn't want that, because it doesn't, you know, it doesn't help them sell new decks, and, you know, it's not fun for us to play against this, so this is a restriction that really had to happen. But I feel that, you know, I'm really happy about this one, because now decks can stop playing 10k vanillas as much, because we don't have to worry too much about surviving their early game. And, you know, it's generally nice that, like, it's a bit better for G decks, So like, you know, it's just a bit healthier. But like, if you're gonna take down 7 runner, then you should also take down Time Leap, in my opinion. Like, I feel like this restriction could have been just as strong as the 2012 one, where they legit killed every meta deck. So I'm a bit disappointed that they didn't do this now, but I guess it might happen in the next restriction list if Time Leap keeps on topping, because then I think Bouchard will have understood that even if they limit 2 cards, that's still not going to change much. But I have a feeling that I'm hopeful that the meta will change and the next World Championship Finals like deck pool will be very different from what we had this year. Like, I'm pretty optimistic, but you know, there's still a lot of sets to come out this year, and I'm sure that it's going to change up the game quite a lot, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, the final new restriction, or unrestriction rather, is Lizard Soldier Conroe. So, starting January 30th, the current restriction for the use of Conroe will be lifted, and fighters may use it as a first Vanguard in all Bouchard official and Bouchard Sanctuary English version tournaments. So that's really good. And it says, this applies to all cards of the same name should there is any reprints in the future. God, how many times can you repeat the same mistake? Anyway, and the reason is, we have identified that the current restriction made for Lizard Soldier Conroe has little influence on the current tournament environment, therefore the above mentioned restriction lift will be implemented. This is nice because, you know, it helps Kagero a little bit, not too much. It's not as impactful as it was before, but it helps them a little bit. You know, they can search for stride fodders, for, you know, just grade 1s to ride if they're grade stuck, for heal triggers to get Denial Griffins off and whatnot. You know, it's generally nice that it got unlifted, and I felt like this was, you know, this should have happened eventually. So I'm pretty happy about this one. But yeah, like, apart from that, there's just like the Ref Ross limit that we already know about, the Odysseus and Barco limits that we already know about. Like, they've been there for a while. But yeah, like this, I'm pretty happy. Like, the differences between the Japanese one is that, like, we still didn't get Lisbeth limited. So I want to see if Neo Nectar starts topping more consistently because of that, and then we get her limited eventually. And also Sanctuary Guard didn't get limited. I wonder, like, it didn't top as super consistently as it did in Japan. Like, when we look at results, like in Japan it tops a lot, but it didn't, I don't know, I feel like it did top quite a few times in the West, but maybe not as much. And so maybe that's why Sanctuary Guard didn't get hit in English, but I guess it's okay. Maybe it's also because they printed new Sanctuary Guard stuff in Revival Collection, so they didn't want to take away our toys just yet. But it's generally interesting that they didn't hit Sanctuary Guard, but I think I'm okay with it, because it, like, we need something to beat Time Leap in the end. So, you know, like, I'm generally quite happy with this restriction list. Like, they could have hit Time Leap a bit harder, but I think it's a start. And, you know, the TikTok restriction is by far the most important one. And, you know, like, if you go on, like, Facebook groups or whatever, you'll see plenty of people that are like, oh my god, I'm quitting this game, I'm gonna go play other TCGs and whatnot. Like, I just want to point out that, like, this has happened so many times before, and we've adapted every time. Like, you know, the end MLB Tsukuyomi reign ended. Somehow it ended. People didn't think it would end. People freaked out about Dawnless Drive. People freaked out about Liberator Alfred, the first one. People freaked out about Descendant when it came out. Like, people freaked out about everything. About Nouvelle, but that one was a bit more understandable. About, like, Blaus, Minerva, Glendios. Like, people freak out about the smallest, like, every deck that becomes meta, people freak out about it. And then people quit the game and they're like, okay, I'm gonna go play other card games. But, like, you need to kind of realize that no matter what card game you go to, unless it's dead and doesn't get new sets of support, there will be a meta, and there will be top decks, no matter what. Pokemon, you know, is maybe a slight exception because it's a bit more varied there, but there was a time when Seismitoad and Night March was legit everywhere, and I'm not gonna forget that. So, you know, it's stuff like that that just kind of tilts me a little bit. And then, you know, I don't know, I keep seeing it when I go on Facebook and just like any real forums or anything, people are just saying the same thing over and over again. So, like, it's gonna be a new meta. I think it's gonna be quite fresh after this restriction list. People are gonna start trying out new things, and, you know, there's still gonna be Time Leap in tournaments. Of course, it's still gonna be Time Leap, but, you know, there's a question if it's gonna top as consistently. And I think that a lot of the Time Leap players now are just gonna start trying out new stuff as well, and we might see a much more varied meta. So this restriction list talk ended up being a bit longer because I'm not just going over the cards, but I wanted to kind of discuss it as well. So leave your thoughts in the comments on what you think about this new restriction list and how you feel about it in general. Is there anything you would have done differently? Would you rather have the Japanese one? Or are you happy with what we have now? So that's pretty much it for me. I'm pretty happy with what we got, and I'm looking forward to how the game evolves in the coming year. And I'll see you guys next time.